welcome to another episode of the Sales RX podcast. I'm your sales doctor, aka Chet Lovegren, here with my co-host Billy Stein with another episode today. And we're talking about something that is actually really near and dear to both of our hearts. And it's about first-time managers. And unfortunately, only 1 in 4 managers ever has any kind of formal training or coaching. A lot of people just get into management because they're good at the job. Unfortunately, they don't stop being good at the job. They don't realize that, as Simon Sinek says, you actually become responsible for the people responsible for the job. Especially as it pertains to C-level executives, it's really important to be able to craft a development plan and also have a system and a process in place to help that leader become the leader they need to be to enable their reps to be the reps that they need to be. Think about it. If you're a CRO and you're bringing on a frontline manager, could you imagine what that does not having a plan in place for them? You wouldn't do it for your AEs. You wouldn't do it for your SDRs. So why would you do it for the person that's responsible for overseeing the department? So here we go. Billy, what's going on? I don't know if we're going to have to blur your shirt out because people might think we're gang affiliated at this point or something.
And you can say what you want about my shirt, but you look like you have a hard stop to go make some hard kombucha.
Indeed. We have officially decided that every week I'm going to wear a different Hawaiian shirt every single week. That's going to be our little theme. And Billy's going to sport some sort of really handsome but ridiculous looking article of clothing.
And you look like you're going to be the guy who Jimmy Buffett is 100% of your personality.
Yes. Ironically, I've never actually listened to a Jimmy Buffett song, but I know he's for old fat guys that wear Hawaiian shirts, smoke cigars, and drink what is the thing called? Pina coladas, right?
Pina coladas.
Is he the pina colada guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you like pina coladas.
Well, that wasn't him, but I do feel like people that listen to Jimmy Buffett love pina coladas. Yeah. My dad is a huge Jimmy Buffett guy.
Who was the pina colada guy? Who sang pina coladas?
We're talking about different generations of music.
Really?
I got nothing for this.
It's that distant. Okay, I didn't know. I thought that Jimmy Buffett was that guy. Is he the cheeseburger in paradise guy?
He's cheeseburger in paradise.
Okay, so he is cheeseburger in paradise. Okay, so that's him. All right. Great restaurant. I've been there before. I really enjoyed it. Not as good as Islands, though, which is actually a local. That's a Southern California thing, right? They don't have islands in other places.
I don't know. I've never been to Islands, but if you do end up going to one of Buffett's restaurants, you will never go wrong with the volcano nachos.
That statement is why he's in good shape and I'm not, is because he doesn't even know what the heck Islands is.
I'm talking about a massive plate of about 10,000 calories of nachos, and you want to talk about me being in good shape?
So, as much as I love talking about food, today we're talking about something different.
If you've been in sales for a while, you've probably noticed that it's harder than ever to get prospects to answer the phone. It's easier than ever to screen calls, and more numbers are showing up as spam likely on people's cell phones.
And apart from the time spent stuck on the phone waiting for prospects to answer, salespeople have to spend a ton of time entering call notes in the CRM, leave voicemails, and create follow-up tasks in the hopes of having future sales conversations. That's why we use Kixi.
It's the modern voice and texting platform that turns your CRM into a true sales engagement platform, all while increasing your answer rates through cutting-edge technology.
With their holistic approach and seamless integrations, you can enable your reps to spend less time on busy work and more time on having conversations with prospects using Kixi's AI-powered features like multi-line power dialing with voicemail detection, advanced local presence, phone number reputation management, and conversation intelligence.
Not only that, Kixi's team of sales engineers will help you build out advanced workflows and automations at no extra cost.
So head over to Kixi.click/salesdoc. That's KIXIE.click/salesdoc, or click the link in the description. Get a fully loaded 10-day extended free trial for your entire team. You don't even need to put down a credit card, and the trial comes with hours of call credits included.
You know, Billy, it's actually pretty interesting. I was reflecting on it. We've known each other for some time now. We have pretty regular conversations. We do the podcast together. But I don't think we've ever really heard from each other how we got into management ourselves, how we got into leadership. I don't think that's a topic that we've ever discussed. And
probably not, because we were already both, well, you're an entrepreneur and you were leading sales teams. I was leading sales teams already when you and I had met. And I think we talked about the discipline, but I don't ever think we talked about the origin story.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to hear from you. As we're talking about today's episode, like share with me and as well as the listeners kind of like, how did you get into management? Because we also know management's not for everybody, right? There, I know some ICs that are in their 50s that are like, dude, I'm cool making my $250,000 a year working in what I'm doing. I don't want to lead people.
And it's a good living for them.
And that's okay. You show up, you clock in, you clock out, you do your thing. But I know, obviously knowing you as well as I do, I can see why you're in leadership. But I would love for you to share with the listeners a little bit about your story and kind of what motivated you there and how you got there.
Yeah. So it started the day I went on site for my final interview at Service Titan. And I can remember this day so vividly. I was wearing a cheap blue suit that I bought for about $80 at the LA Fashion District. Yeah. Getting off the elevator, walking through the sales floor, willfully ignorant of just how completely overmatched I was walking in there. So Jay Jones was the guy who was my hiring manager, and Jay was managing a team of 6 AEs. He was scaling it up to 10. I think he managed like 14 before he actually promoted up, and they gave him some help below him. But the interview started at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. 30 minutes into it, we had to take like a 45-minute intermission because Jay had a closing call that he needed to jump on. And I'd never seen that before. And it was like a eye-opening experience because 2 tech sales jobs at that point, no sales manager had ever supported me in a sales activity hands-on before. I think even one of my CEOs who I reported up to, that dude wouldn't be within 20 feet of me at any point ever. So that was like very surreal in my mind. And I was very green. And when I went through that interview experience, I feel like he probably saw big aspirations in me and maybe some raw talent, but none of it had been developed at all. And all that kind of came to a head when I was in my interview. You know, I got to the point of the mock pitch. You know, you do that in every one of your AE interviews. And I go through it and I totally muffed it. I was so green. I didn't even know how to prepare for an interview at that point, at that level. And so I get done going through the pitch and he looks at me, he says, "Wow, I expected a lot more out of you." Just like that. It wasn't even like I expected a lot more out of that. It was I expected a lot more out of you. And in that moment, I like felt like I let down like my JV baseball coach. And it was kind of that eureka moment where I saw it and I was like, man, these guys at Service Titan, like this is the big leagues. And this is what it looks like to play at the highest level. And this is the expectation. So it was probably like 5:30 at this point. And I had to make a decision, like fight or flight kicked in. I was like, I have to work for this guy and I have to work at this company. So I look him back in the face. I say, okay, let's run it again. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, dude, if you didn't like the first one, let me prove to you why I deserve to be here. Let's do it again. And with a smile, he looks at me and says, okay, do it again. So we do the whole mock pitch again. And I totally muffed it again the second time. It wasn't much better. I think he probably threw me a couple of softballs in there, but we got done and he kind of walked me out. It was almost like 7 p.m. probably at that point. And I did the walk of shame out of the totally empty offices back to my car. And I'm thinking in my head, like, man, that was my chance and I blew it. And I get a call from the recruiter in the car and I'm like, all right, this isn't going to be good. He says, man, Jay loved it. He wants to make you an offer. I'm like, really? Just like that. I'm like, really? And, you know, that for me was that moment where I recognized sales leadership was a discipline. It wasn't just some means to an end position for like a graveyard for a successful sales rep. And I looked at that and I was like, man, that was motivation when I was trying to get my foot in the door. And then I got to the company and like the co-founders were awesome. CRO, the CMO, they're both geniuses. SVPs of sales, enterprise, everybody down is great at that company, all the way down to sales engineering and the AE line managers. And I remember thinking like all the way through the whole body of work that I was going to put in there was, these are the people that I want to seat at the table with. These are the ones that there's a reason companies do well. And there's a reason this company is in such high standing. So that was really it for me. And that set the table for how hard I was going to work in order to move my career a certain way so that I could be around certain people.
Yeah. That's really cool, man.
Yeah. What was yours?
Yeah, I would say mine was a lot less inspiring than that. It was more actually geared around burnout. So I got really burnt out as a seller. And I found myself in this position where I was constantly showing other people how to do what I was doing. Because I don't know if a lot of people know, but like the majority, 5 years of my sales experience was I was doing entertainment in LA, acting, music, stand-up comedy.
Like everybody else?
Yeah, like everybody else. I had a dream. But I wasn't making enough to do it full time. So what I did for 5 years is actually funny. I probably, I don't know, put in maybe 70-hour weeks when you think about the job I was doing plus the
passion
side.
projects.
Yeah.
Yep.
But what I recognized was, hey, I have my insurance license. And there are all these different pockets of town that I'm constantly spending time in. Burbank, West Hollywood, Studio City. Sometimes you meander down to South Bay for other things. But majority of the stuff was up here. And so I actually had agreements in place with a bunch of different agents. And it was like, hey, when I'm in your area, like I'll prospect and work for you. You know what I mean? Go knock on doors, talk to commercial businesses, set up appointments. So if I was going to an audition in Burbank at 11 a.m., I was doing an hour of business walks before that. And then after that audition around like 1 o'clock, time to get lunch and stuff, I would have appointments set for the rest of the day. And I was selling commercial insurance policies for whatever agent I was in their local area. I had agreements with 5 local agents. And I made really good money. Like all my friends around me were struggling on food stamps or working for Uber. I was making 6 figures. Like, what the heck? But these agents were like, dude, I need to hire more people to replicate that. And so as they grew, you know, I was showing people a lot of stuff. I still have it. It's on my shelf back there. But I have this manual, and it's called Titan Insurance Training Solutions. And it's the first training handbook I ever put together. It's about 58, 60 pages. I basically packaged the way that I sell commercial insurance products, and I started selling that to agents. I called up every agent in the surrounding LA area and was like, hey, you know how so-and-so is at the top of commercial lines in your district? You want to know how they got there? This is how they got there. Let me show you how. So I went from basically working in commercial insurance to slinging my own sales training handbook. And then in that interim, I was trying to find a job in tech because I knew that's where I wanted to go because I had friends that were in tech. So for me, getting into tech as an AE, which I landed my first gig as an AE in like late 2019, it felt like more of a formality because I already had the training and coaching side of it. And I was trying to get to management. Like I only started working in tech. Like I was interviewing for sales manager jobs at other types of companies, but I wanted to get into tech because I knew I could make a bigger impact there. So I only took the AE job I took because I was like, got to do that long enough till I can get into leadership. When I finally did get into leadership, I will say the one thing that I learned that was way different was not just the upskilling of people, but the management of people, how to create culture. Like there was a lot of good things I learned from my CRO, Dan Salazar, when I became an SDR leader. And I became an SDR leader because that was the path of least resistance. They had an opening. I could move into managing people. I was great at cold outbound because I had done it my whole life. But it was really interesting for me because I kind of just by nature shown people how to be good at the job. But I did have a passion and learned in my first management job how to be responsible for the people that are responsible for the job. Because I did at first, and there's a lot of learnings that I had along the way. I thought I had to be real buttoned up and everything. Now I'm pretty transparent. Like I'll tell people what's going on aside from like internal things I'm not supposed to talk about. But like I'm open and I'm pretty transparent. Like when I was leading SDR teams, I'd say like, look, my job is to get you off my team as fast as possible.
Yes.
And it was always weird to people that are like, why would you say that? Like, no, it sounds weird, right? Because somebody's like, well, don't you want to have me? But no, that means you're moving on to bigger and better things. If I can get you off my team, that means you're either an AE or you're a team lead or something of that nature. So there were some learnings along the way, but yeah, it was a little bit more. It was just like I had grinded so much in sales because I was also doing this other thing for like 5 years. I was doing 30 hours a week of this, 30 to 40 hours a week of working. And so it felt like I was working 80-hour weeks. And so I got burnt out really quick. And I was like, I want to show people how to do it because I do such a great job at it. I just had to go learn how the tech jargon works and what their frameworks
and how to be great at that.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of a difference in tech than commercial insurance, but the things still stay the same. You're still selling something to someone. There are a lot of general frameworks. And there are frameworks like I didn't realize I was following Medic when I was selling commercial insurance, but I was. But because I didn't know what Medic was because I wasn't in tech sales. But then I'm like, oh yeah, like who signs the check? Who's going to nudge the person to sign the check? How do they decide to, like, what's the process for making a decision? How are they going to like measure if we're better than a competitor? Decision process, decision criteria, economic value. Like, so I was already doing Medic. It was just not labeled that. So there was a bit of a learning curve, but I remember Dan being like, dude, for someone who's never worked in tech, you're crushing it. And you're kind of at the top of the leaderboard for what we expect for future people that want to, show people how it's done and lead people to success. And so shout out to him for giving me my first opportunity to lead SDRs at Extensive, formerly known as 3PL Central. But yeah, not as inspiring. Just kind of really got to a place where I was burnt out. And I said, how can I show people how to do this? Showing agents how to do it. How can I show people how to do this on a larger scale? And more importantly, move from being an entrepreneur to selling insurance training handbooks to having someone pay me a salary and benefits to do it for their company.
But I think you hit on the important thing is that if you have a great leader that shows you that they're going to invest in you and make you the best possible version of yourself, that inspires you to then want to go do that for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
completely.
By way of standard LA grinder story, that is pretty inspiring.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. It's been a long journey and lots of ups and downs, but it was, that's why I'm really excited to talk about what we're talking about today, because most managers I talked to in my leadership boot camp, when I became a first-time manager myself, I had some pretty good guidance. I was fortunate enough for that. But majority of people, it's kind of like the big question is, now what? You get promoted to a first-time manager, now what? And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so let's jump into our first segment. This is Cap or No Cap. This is where Billy and I review a piece of content. Could be something on LinkedIn or a post on a Reddit board or a community page. Obviously, we blur out names and company names and profile pictures for anonymity. Or we might look at a video on social media, which is a little bit different because people are kind of publicly posting their stuff like that in a video world, not in a private community or only to their LinkedIn connections. So we feel it's a little more fair game to either call out cap or no cap. And for those that aren't aware, cap just means that, it's something that we don't think is entirely accurate and maybe full of some BS. And no cap is, hey, we fully validate this and believe it to be true. So without further ado, let's jump into our first clip here. I think we got a YouTube video. Let's check it out.
Yep. So we got a YouTube video about how every one-on-one with your sales manager feels.
One-on-ones with my manager always go down the same way. I start with a small tummy ache because I'm not at quota yet, and he starts by asking me the same question every time.
Court, how you doing?
As if he actually gives a shit.
Boss man, I'm doing amazing.
I lie straight to his face. Then he'll move on to what he really cares about, which is...
So how are we going to hit quota, Corp?
This not being my first rodeo, I deliver well-crafted stories on why each deal in my pipeline is going to close. He zeroes in on one in particular.
Any updates on Verkatha?
Oh, you mean the one that went dark on me last quarter, but I don't have the heart to take it out of my pipeline because it was literally the biggest opportunity I've ever had?
I still feel really good about that one. Well, let's commit.
He says because it'll make him look good to upper management.
I'm not quite ready to go there yet.
Or ever, because, like I said, the deal is dead.
Well, we need to raise your commit somehow.
So I do what any rep does, which is fold immediately and raise my commit to an unattainable number.
Great, well, I'm here for you if you need anything.
Unless, of course, he's not, which is most of the time. Then we shake hands and I'm off to the sales pit. I look forward to disappointing him again same time next week.
So I know that you have different culture that you've instilled at your company, and you've probably experienced it because you've been at other companies, but par for the course with what you've heard or what you might have seen when you were a rep. What do you think? Is this almost feel like every one-on-one when you were in IC with your manager, and typically more junior frontline managers?
Yeah, I feel like this is a perfect representation. And obviously, if you work in tech sales and have been living under a rock for the last 6 years, you may not know who Corporate Bro is.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that video is definitely no cap. One of the ways that we look at toxic managers is like, well, my job is to pump up the pipeline number to make it look really good to the board.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he nails that cliche perfectly in that video. On my team, I do not like to superficially inflate the number, and we like to play the conservative game. So when we forecast our commit based on what is the lowest possible expected walkout rate on any one deal. And we remain very conservative on the time front, but we're always pushing to move deals faster.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he nailed it. I think there are many companies that unfortunately work that exact policy and forecasting, the perfect mix is bullish but realistic with everything. And I think that's a perfect relic of what tech sales was like in 2019. So I think it's no cap. Perfect.
I'm going to agree with you. It's no cap, and it's no cap for a couple reasons. I'm going to give 2 shout outs. Number one, shout out to you because you called out a book 2 episodes ago in our AI and sales podcast episode, To Sell is Human.
Yep.
And about human connection and all those things and how yada, yada, right? But another shout out, Larry Long Jr. I was watching a clip that he posted on LinkedIn the other day, and he was talking about how managers don't typically realize that, especially if they come from sales and they become sales managers, they never stop selling. It's just their customer is different.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, the same way that you couldn't put a one-size-fits-all approach on your customers or your prospects that you were selling to as an IC, individual contributor, you can't do the same thing with your people. And I think this is something that, for some reason, first-time sales managers specifically get wrong, which is funny because you probably got promoted because you did a pretty good job at your job, which means you probably understood that it's not a one-size-fits-all policy when selling to prospects. But then you get into leadership, and the first thing you start doing is one-size-fits-all leadership.
Well, you want to, I think where you're going with this is you want to look like the A player. You want to make your boss look good based on that hire of you.
Well, you do the
so
things
you will
that you
push
think,
things in there like that.
Well, because you think that's what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Because you're like, oh, but like maybe there's some reps that communicate in that way and like want to follow the style, like, you know what I'm saying? But it's just like, I see that more on the junior side. I've had some tenured leaders before where they're still trying to achieve what was happening in that video. Let's figure out how we can get this actually in commit. The difference is they weren't just outright trying to get me to move it to commit or putting it on wishful thinking. They would ask the question, okay, so you have this in your commit. Why are they looking at buying software? And if you can't answer that question, it moves out of commit. It doesn't even get to go into best case. It goes into pipeline. And
I would even say it's, why are they looking to buy our software?
Yeah.
Because they could be buying software and that's best case, or, that's your representative high, whatever your naming conventions are in your forecasting methodology. But why us?
Yeah.
You got to be able to have a very strong answer if you're going to commit a deal.
So I think to your point, junior managers try to just move as much into commit as they can, but more tenured leaders who understand the game and understand how to play it are more scrupulous with what they're allowing in commit. And so I think that's the big difference here. So it's definitely not, there's no cap there. That's a great clip. And unless you've been living under a rock and don't know who Corporate Bro is, but he's great. And I love that video because it's like walk into every meeting with a tummy ache. That's so funny. All right, so we got a second clip here. It looks like it's a YouTube short. What are we looking at?
Yeah, this is a video titled "Why You're a Terrible Sales Manager."
Terrible sales manager.
your management style is so complicated that it takes an army of physicists to figure out what it is your guys are supposed to be doing, then you're doing something wrong. A lot of sales managers track a lot of useless data. They're trying really hard, but ultimately they're not focusing on the things that actually make you money. So the first thing a sales manager must do who's good is they must break down the process and understand what the client journey is, and then just have a very simple mud map of exactly what that is. Then from there, you attach in all the processes that happen in between. You make sure those are correct, and then you have a really, really coherent map that anyone can come in and understand. If it's not simple and clear, then the moment stuff gets a bit funny, you're going to be so bamboozled with your own weird, wild, and wonderful processes and data that you're not going to really know what to fix. So what you're going to do is you're going to try to fix everything. When you fix everything, you fix nothing.
What do you think?
Well, my first question is, what the is a mud map? How great a use was that for the soundboard? He gives me crap about the soundboard every week, and I even loaded it up with even more sounds this week, and so I was looking for an opportunity. But yeah, what is a mud map?
You know what?
Was that a typo?
I think I'm responsible for about probably half the views on that video at this point, just because I watched it so many times in leading up to this. I don't know what a mud map is.
Yeah. Do you think never heard map?
I've never heard that expression before.
I know what a mind map is.
I'm sure a mud map is a thing. It just maybe hasn't made it to our circles.
If you're from the same geographical part of the planet as that guy is based on his accent, can you maybe let us know if there's something culturally we don't understand?
Yeah, I do want to know what a mud map is. But what do you think in general, aside from the mud map thing? Do you think he was on the right track?
Yeah, I do. Data is fantastic, and I am a nerd when it comes to data. I mean, I literally shout out Ryan Reiser, showing people how much you're making cost per call, how much you're making per call every time you hit dial, even if it's a penny, dial.
That's
for
granular.
dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that stuff. That stuff gets me going. I love it. It's oh, cool. Show me purpose and intent behind everything I'm doing. But data can be biased, and unfortunately, you're going to be taught this too as a frontline manager. Every frontline manager is, but you are instructed by your direct report that, you are instructed by your boss to tell a story with data and to make yourself look good. Every boss I've ever had has done that as a leader. The data is your chance to craft your narrative. If you're losing, why are you losing? Go find a data point that supports your hypothesis. And unfortunately, in leadership culture, it becomes a scapegoating process. And so data is not leveraged for insight. Data is leveraged for justification. And I kind of don't like that. It should be leveraged for insight to be able to make great business decisions. Instead, we've gotten into this habit where it's used to scapegoat and justify why we're at where we're at. So I do think data is important, but it is biased. And I love what he called out about they get so drunk on their own process. I've said that multiple times before, that again, first-time managers, everybody's not going to fit your process. You got to have different leadership styles with different people. I'm a firm, you have your leadership style, but you have to lead to different people different ways by identifying who are my builders, who are my maintainers, and who are my departers, and not managing to, which I think we'll talk about later in the episode, managing to the 20%, manage to the 80%. So I'm going to say no cap. I like that video. I agree with everything.
Yeah, I think the most important thing he says in that video, what really struck a chord with me, was when you try to fix everything, you fix nothing. But and maybe he has more videos about this. Maybe that was just one of a series. I'm actually going to say the video is cap. As a leader, you need to manage three things. You need to manage process. You need to manage data, but you also got to manage personalities. That is the role of a manager. And my concern with that video is that he only talked about process and data. He didn't say a word about personalities. As a leader, my belief is my number one responsibility is I'm a translator. And translating swaths of data, parts of our process, things that are happening in different organizations that the people that report to me, who I work for, aren't necessarily a privy to. And I don't think he hit it. I don't think he hit the topic fully on that. So I'm going to say it's cap.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, we're going to jump on to our next section. But before we do, let's hear a quick word from our partner in the podcast space.
You're probably wondering how we can both work full-time, produce a podcast from the Inglewood studios, and still find time to enjoy our lives.
It's because we partnered with Content Quarterbacks to help produce our weekly podcast.
Content Quarterbacks is a full-service digital media production company. They will help you ideate, create, produce, and publish your B2B podcast.
Not only do they provide us great content to share with the SalesRx community, they also help us publish our podcast on multiple platforms. They review and track our audience analytics and episode performance, all while providing strategy sessions to ensure that we're bringing the highest quality edutainment to you, our listener.
If you're in the B2B space and want to have a great show like this, you can click the link in the description below and book a free consultation with Content Quarterbacks.
So stop thinking about creating content and start doing it. Now let's get back to the show. All right. So now we are jumping into Billy's Black Book.
You just made the list!
All right. So Billy, so we learned about, your first management job, how that, gave you a viewpoint on leadership. And I know from talking to you and learning about your foundational principles, your values, your virtues, the things you've probably learned along the way. But let's spell it out for the viewers. I'd love, especially for the first-time managers that are listening, people that are aspiring to be first-time managers, and also let's speak a little bit to senior leaders who are responsible for either hiring first-time managers or promoting their top people to first-time managers. What are like 5 key things that you learned as a first-time manager?
Yeah. So first and foremost, my first management role, I managed a team of 10 BDRs and I had 4 full cycle AEs. And, I was so excited for this job. Melissa Petty, shout out to you wherever you may be. She hired me into the role, and a lot of that role was already carved out for me. And a lot of it was creating this new program at a company that had never thought like this before. So when I prepared, ran the gauntlet of interviews. And when I got the job, there was about a 2-week period between when I had accepted the offer and when it actually started. And I stayed busy, man. I was watching YouTube videos of sports coaches, like trying to figure out what that first team meeting was going to look like. I was practicing it in the mirror and during workouts and during random times. That was all that was running through my head. And I read 3 great books, and I recommend these 3 books to anybody. I read Leading by Sir Alex Ferguson. I read The Damned United by David Peace, and I read Astro Ball. And I was feeling really good, quantitatively, qualitatively, like I knew what I was going to do when I got the job. And I was confident, and I couldn't wait for day one. And not 48 hours into the role, I had to put out my first major fire. And something that I learned that I really like is you realize sales management, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And it's something that you can do all this prep work for, and you can feel totally on point. And then you go from proactive to reactive real fast based on all the variables that come at you throughout the day. So I'm glad it happened that way, because I had to get out of my comfort zone quickly. And for all the first-time leaders that are listening, you're going to live outside of your comfort zone more than you're going to live in your swing zone throughout your career, but it's going to feel a million times more amplified in that first job, and especially in those first 90 days. So when I was thinking about it, there's 5 things that these books taught me that I used and I did really well that helped me navigate a lot of that uncertainty. So I'm going to talk through it right now, and I'm going to kind of point out to those books. So the very first thing that I learned from Sir Alex Ferguson in the book Leading was, in management, you manage personalities. And I'll kind of give you the operating thought here is that building trust is not something you do with a pump-up speech in your first team meeting. Not everybody is just going to be fully on board with you as a first-time manager. And what I learned was being genuine means building trust over a lot of time.
Especially if you are a first-time manager. people actually might scrutinize you a little bit more.
as they should.
Yeah.
As they really should. And like you talked about on your team, my goal is to get you out of this role.
Mm-hmm.
Every job for every individual is a business trip, especially if you're growth minded. You're doing this because you have bigger aspirations to go somewhere else. So my goal with managing personalities was I'm going to give myself 90 days and I'm going to figure out 14 people's triggers. What is it that I can do to push them to be better? And for you, if you're coming into a first-time role, 2 questions that I asked in my first one-on-one in this order worked out for me as part of building that foundation of trust. First, I asked every rep, what is your personal why? Who do you want to be from the time you close your laptop every day to the time you open it the next day? Whatever answers they give you, those are the things that they're pushing professionally to try to finance, to try to influence in some sort of way. Second question was, what do you want to be professionally? Like, what is that goal?
Mm-hmm.
Because that professional goal and that growth trajectory they want to take influences that personal why. And knowing these 2 things and knowing what it is they're pushing for, when you have to have a hard conversation, it allows you to push past a lot of that professional emotion in every situation. The second thing I learned was from Astroball, and I know that everybody who knows me knows that Moneyball was a book I wrote my high school term paper on, very influential book in my life. I've gifted it to many people along the way.
Except for me.
Well, I got another one for you. So there's a book written by Ben Reiter called Astroball, and it talks about how the Houston Astros built their organization. It took Moneyball one step further, and there's a reason why they're in the ALCS for the 7th straight year. But Astroball teaches you 3 things that are very relevant to sales. Number 1, you need to know what the data framework looks like. Number 2, you need to figure out the limitations of that data framework. And number 3, you need to figure out where you diverge. So I'd been at Service Titan for 3 years. I knew the sales process. I knew what we sold. I knew who we sold to, and I knew how we sold to those individuals. So that allowed me to focus on the other 2 areas I needed to grow in, which was managing the personalities and figuring that piece out, but also the data. So the framework I took was in the first 30 days, I'm going to know our data model. What does the sales math look like and where do I find it? Those second 30 days, I started poking holes in the data a little bit and trying to figure out like, okay, what could be innovated here? And then in the third 30 days, I did my best to influence it. And I didn't go too aggressive too quickly, but managing my BDR team, one of the things I figured out was, we called businesses that relied on their phone ringing to make money. Mm-hmm. So our connect rates were a lot higher than a normal SaaS company is when you're calling cell phones.
Yeah.
What I learned in the data was that my top performers had a lot more talk time than the average seller on the team. And so we used that correlation. We figured out if you have 1.5 minutes or more of talk time for every 1 dial you make, that is the leading indicator of success. In 14 months I was in the role, 12 out of the 14 months, my top performer had more talk time than the average rep.
Yeah.
And so that data divergence helped a lot, which kind of dovetailed into the third thing, which was around building the culture. And when you structure a team, you don't structure a team around headcount. And like, yeah, we have a certain number, we need to have a certain number of seats filled in order to get there. But you build a culture. And if you want to be heard, make a statement. If you're a first-time manager and you want to make a statement, you want to be impactful towards the culture that your team looks forward to coming in every day, find an excuse to get hands-on. You got several. For me, my belief in my first management role, and even in this one, is there is nothing that I'm going to ask my reps to do that I wouldn't be willing to do on their behalf. Mm-hmm. That includes making dials for them, jumping on demos, prospecting, filling out, items in the forecast when they've got other things going on.
Especially when you're a frontline manager and you were most likely put in that role because, again, you were good at the job. I think it's very important to be able to
also as part of your own development as a manager to understand how to show someone how to fish, because that's entirely different. It's entirely different than just there's a difference in skill between just being good at something and being able to effectively communicate and show someone how to be good at something. So it's a learning opportunity for the frontline manager, but it's also pivotal to that person's success because you're probably a frontline manager because you've seen that scenario 7 times before to their one, you know?
And it's a great point. And what I learned from it, I just wanted to be hands-on because I wanted to prove to them that I'm willing to do anything you're willing to do.
You're in the trenches with you.
But you actually learn a great framework as a result of it. Number one, you learn how the individuals on your team work.
Mm-hmm.
Then you learn how to work with them. And by the way, you're going to make a lot of mistakes in the way you try to work with people. So you're just learning how I collaborate with the individuals on my team. And then through experience and through success and through failure, you're going to learn how to work well with people on your team. And if you want to be heard, make a statement.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing, and I think this is a microcosm for your career in general, but the train doesn't stop twice. And in management, what you learn about that statement is everybody's going to tell you they have a growth mindset. And you want to believe that. You want to look to the best in everybody.
Yeah, everybody's a hard worker, quick learner, growth mindset, growth oriented. And it's like, okay, great. I've heard that 10 times already today from 10 other interviews.
Exactly. And unfortunately, you as a manager, you cannot force a growth mindset on anybody. You can't make them like the role they're doing or the discipline that they picked. So you have to vet it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned quickly and the way I think about it now is however many direct reports you have on your team, you have that many full-time jobs. At ServiceTitan, I had 14. At Seismic, not as many because my ratio is a little bit smaller. And the way I think about it and what I learned from it is like you have a minimum commitment to everybody, but you can invest the maximum in those that want that investment.
Mm.
And so you need to learn fast everybody's talent and trajectory. And rather than just picking to spend your time with your lowest performers or your most apathetic individuals, you need to invest in the people that are going to grow within the company, that are going to make your business unit better as a result of your investment. And the last thing I learned it from Doc Rivers, the famous basketball coach, is that Ubuntu is a way of life. And if you're not familiar with the term Ubuntu, it means I am because you are. I am strong because you are strong. I am good because you are good. You are new to a discipline. And with being new to a discipline, especially if you are strong at what you did before, you're going to have a lot of weaknesses in this role. And the way to think about it is you need to rely on where all the individuals on your team are already very strong to make up for where you're weak.
Mm-hmm.
An example, if you come into a new sales manager role, whether it's your first time managing sales or whether you're new at a company, your sales force process is going to be totally different. It certainly was for me when I was managing BDRs at a company where I was an AE before. And you not being strong at it on day one doesn't break the enterprise. So you need to rely on the fact that people are strong there because you've got time to learn as a result. And if you take that into everything, where somebody else is strong will make up for where you're weak. And that gives you flexibility to learn over time. You have to force yourself to learn it because you need to be good for your reps.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you can take a deep breath and you can relax a little bit knowing that where they are strong, the organization is strong.
Y'all just got a free keynote here, by the way. You mind if I add one thing to those 5?
Please.
Something that I've identified that I know a lot of managers stop doing, and I think it actually piggybacks off the last one. Because what's the opposite of feeling imposter syndrome?
Feeling too comfortable.
Too comfortable and confident. When you get promoted into management or you land your first management job, don't stop playing the game. And what do I mean by the game? It doesn't stop at frontline management. There are other opportunities. There's a growth trajectory in place.
but people tend to feel like they reached that cliff. I hit the summit.
Mhm.
And so two things happen. Number one, they stop trying to manage their promotion and growth opportunities with the same pace as they did when they were an AE or an SDR. And number two, this could be or they get too comfortable and confident and they become a very difficult person to work with cross-collaboratively with other departments. You want to do the same thing you were doing in terms of optics with every other department head that you come in contact with, that you work on a project with, because when that sales manager role that you're in, now there's an opportunity to be a regional manager or maybe even like a director level where you're going to manage 3 other sales managers. Who do they want to promote? The person who's been meticulously tracking their performance and their growth trajectory with their manager and getting that buy-in the same way that you did when you were an individual contributor, like we kind of talked a little bit about last week. And the person that marketing leadership goes, yeah, Billy's a shoo-in for that. We love Billy. Billy's great. Billy's awesome. Or the person that's just kind of like doing their job and has conflict with every other department head that they have to work on. Everybody's wrong and they're always right. So don't stop playing the game. I think that would be my little add-on to that is you're still in the game. You're just in a different version of it. So don't stop playing the game.
Yeah. Jason Ferguson, one of my favorite coworkers I've ever had, who's now a very successful TEDx speaker. Shout out, Jason. He always used to say, stay new. And like when you go into that role, stay new, learn new things, grow more, because you also have a career ladder you're trying to get up. And it's not only about knowing how to close deals.
I agree.
All right, moving on to our third and final segment, Doctor's Orders. This is the part of the show where you, the listener, submit your questions and go-to-market challenges to get prescriptive, tactical, and practical approaches by the doctor himself.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So this came from somebody from one of your leadership boot camps, Chet.
All right.
And it says, Chet, I had a blast in your leadership boot camp, but wanted to double down on a question I had from the slide that said, empathy doesn't equal a lack of accountability. I have a rep on my team who has very frequent family emergencies and tends to randomly miss days, and even no call, no shows to important internal calls towards the end of the month. Our business is very transactional and our quotas are measured monthly. So this rep missing important calls towards the end of the month is hurting their performance. I'm 4 months into my role as sales manager, and this rep hasn't hit over 60% in any of those months. Several deals have slipped through the pipeline due to their frequent absences. How do I balance being empathetic towards their personal situation while also trying to hold them accountable to their performance? All caps, help!
Nice.
Well, that's a great question. And congrats to this person for hitting their first 90 days in their first management role. This is a tough one. And obviously there's a lot of very specific details in there.
Yep.
Transactional, no more than 60%. So a lot of that stuff can be answered by what your guidelines are in terms of sales performance. I've always put that, look, if you go whatever we're measuring most, if it's quarters, it's a little bit of a faster timeline. If it's monthly, you get a couple extra, measurables. But like if you're on monthly measurements, if you hit below 75% in back-to-back months, that's triggering something for sure. If you go under 50% in 1 month, that's triggering something as well. Could be different for you if you're quarters, maybe it's like, hey, whatever that structure is, maybe if you hit under 60% in 1 quarter, then it's a conversation about what next quarter looks like. Giving someone 2 quarters on a measurable is a really long time to see that back to back. But if you're monthly, I would say look, if you're back to back months under 75%, that's going to trigger something. I don't know if it's a PIP or a conversation with HR. So the first thing that can be solved by this is just really managing to the performance guidelines that you have in place. I think that helps draw some urgency. You also got to think about what is your goal of this person? I mean, do you want to work with this person any longer? Or are you like, hey, how should I get this person off my team? How do I manage this person out? Which sometimes has to happen. I talk all the time about, identifying your builders, your maintainers, and your departers. Builders are your day ones. They'll do everything and anything. They probably have the same growth mindset you do. That's why you're in leadership and they're looking to you for that coaching. Maintainers just want to clock in, clock out. They'll give you 80 to 90% every month of performance. That's okay. The world needs clock punchers. Then the departers, which are people you either need to coach up or coach out. And so that's the first thing you have to decide is, do I want to coach this person up or do I want to coach this person out? If you're committed, which I think first-time managers are kind of like the girl who goes, I think I can fix him, right? Like you see that in the dating stories on movies, on TV all the time. I think that's how first-time managers can be sometimes. And so we go, I can fix that person. I can help them. But in general, I think the big topic here is, I love that they called out that slide because it's just a slide with big text that says empathy doesn't equal lack of accountability. We tend to mix the two together. And so then people come to us with personal problems and it's like, oh, but that's why they're struggling. And we need to be careful because HR and legal guidelines and this, that, the other. I can't give you advice on the HR side of things. Work that out with your HR person directly. But when somebody comes to me and I will give you a great example without naming any names. I was leading a global sales development team and I had someone who was living on the East Coast. So being on the West Coast, naturally, I was always an hour or two late to kind of catching up their performance. But I'd recognize at 10 a.m. Pacific, my reps on the West Coast that I knew were working very hard were doing really well activity-wise and outcome-wise. So a couple opportunities already created. Way to go, guys. It's not even, we're 2 hours in. East Coast just having a completely different time. And what I started learning was, since that person knew that their leader, essentially what my hypothesis was that became true, because that person's leader was on the West Coast time, they knew that they didn't really, their performance wasn't really getting monitored the first couple hours a day. But because they were East Coast, now they're pushing all their correspondence to when they think they should actually be working. So instead of working at what would be 6 a.m. my time for them, 9 a.m., 9 to 5, they were really working noon to like what would be 3, because they were like, oh, that's when Chet's awake. And you saw it in the performance. And then when it came time to talk about it, there was a lot of, oh, well, my dad's going through this and my mom's going through that. So similar to this, like, oh, family emergency, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So first establish, do you want to coach this person up? Do you want to coach them out? Second, you have to work within the lines of your HR. And if we're going to coach them out, what's the next step? If we're going to coach them up, what are the things that I can offer and what can I say? But there are typically 3 questions that I ask when someone is masking their poor performance because of personal struggle. Family member sick. My wife's been ill and I've had to drop my kids off at school. I'm late to this. I missed these calls. Again, missing internal calls with no call, no show. Like there's no excuse for a lack of communication. So that's an entirely different podcast episode. But if someone is coming to you scapegoating their performance based on personal struggle that they're going through, there are 3 questions I ask. Number 1, do you want to work through this? Because if you don't want to work through this, the answer is very clear what the next step is. We focus on getting you out of here. We focus on putting you in a position where you can do what you want to do then. Yes, Chet, I want to work through this. Okay, so you do want to work through this. Great. Let's follow that talk track. What's the second question? Are you ready to work through this? Because if you're not, then maybe we work with HR and figure out what a family medical leave policy is, extended PTO. I don't know what the situations might be, but if you want to work through this, but you're not ready, let's figure out how we can get you to a place where you are. Maybe you need some time away. If you do want to work through this, but you are ready, great. Move on to your third question, which is, okay, so how are we going to hold each other accountable that we're committing to the first 2? Which I think helps establish something you actually said, Billy, in the first podcast you did virtually in season 2, was I want to hear about how we as adults had a conflict. We had a conversation. Here's what the problem was. Here's what we talked about. And here's the resolution we came to. That's kind of what that third question does. How are we going to hold each other accountable to our answers from the first 2 questions? Because if it's performance, we can just get more granular performance, and you're agreeing that if performance lacks, or maybe it's attendance, it's really up in the air, but you have to answer those 3 questions.
And I think what sticks out to me in this ask is we have to recognize that there's duality of accountability for a manager.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is we are accountable to supporting our reps and whatever they're going through in their life that shapes their personality and their decisions, but we're also accountable to the business. So this is a hard situation for a first-time manager.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you some questions, because
Yeah.
there's more coaching that needs to go in for this first-time manager that we need to address here. When you see the part where it says no call, no shows,
Yeah.
how does that sit with you?
It's so easy to handle that as someone who's going to miss a meeting today. And I'm reading between the lines. I think it's no call, no shows to, I think when they say important meetings, it might be like internal meetings. If it's customer facing, prospect facing meetings, holy crap, that is an immediate situation. But I don't think there's any, look, I want to believe the best in people, but if someone no call, no shows to a meeting as an employee who's got servitude to the company because we're paying your bills, we're paying for you to have health insurance, all the things that you're getting from us to at least attend the calls, no call, no show, I'm sorry, but it better be life or death. Because I don't understand in any other situation. I've even had situations where my daughter needs to be picked up from school. She's not feeling good. It is like an emergency. If I've had a situation where I'm calling my VP going, I'm not going to make that call. I need someone to hop on it. I mean, this is your number one priority from 9 to 5. And I know that's tough because people's family first. Yes, family first. Family first to me is when it's 5 o'clock, I shut down and I'm done and I'm with my family. You know what I mean? Family first is like, hey, if my kids are really sick, or this week we were talking, I was going to go to that leadership SDR leader conference just to see what's what in Austin, but my wife was sick. Didn't want to leave her holding the bag with 3 kids, being sick with me, gone for 2.5, 3 days. Family first. All right, I'm not going to go. I'm going to stay here. You know what I mean? That's what I think of when I think of family first. But if you have a prospect call or a one-on-one with your boss, unless you are in a car wreck and in a coma, you can call, you can at least text. No call, no shows are just drive me wild.
Yeah, to me, the no call, no show raises a flag.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been my belief with every one of my sellers that, hey, look, for an internal call, prioritize customer sales calls more than anything.
Of course.
But I have never had any divergence from just the agreed upon handshake that, like, hey, if you're going to miss a meeting, a Slack will be sufficient. Just let me know you're not going to be there.
Yeah.
And you know, for this individual who's a first-time manager, like, that is something you need to be cognizant of within your culture, is like, they are still accountable to communicate with you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the other thing too is, like, you're talking about coach up versus coach out. And that is, I don't think there's any good, healthy manager that wants to ever terminate an employee. But unfortunately, it's part of what you signed up for as a sales leader. So how do you rationalize it? Like, what advice would you give around vetting for whether you're going to coach them up or whether you need to coach them out?
Well, that's all for today's episode. Again, if you are interested in engaging with us with the podcast further, you can check out the links in the show description below to both Billy and I's LinkedIn's. You can look at past episodes. You can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter that we release by going to the Sales Doctor website at www.thesalesdocrx.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. And if you didn't enjoy the show, leave a review that you think is relevant, because that's the only way that we can grow the show is by getting feedback. If you're listening on Spotify, you can do the same thing. You can follow the podcast. It'll show up organically in your feed. You can also give us 5 stars or whatever rating you think is relevant. Big shout out again to this week's Keystone sponsor, Kixie. You can check out the show description below to get a free trial with some call credits as well. Seamlessly integrate into your CRM. Stop listening to dial tones and waiting for prospects to respond and start having sales conversations. That's all. We look forward to seeing you every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific for another installment of the Sales RX podcast. Don't forget to check us out for our bi-weekly LinkedIn Live fireside chats with members of the Kixie organization. And let's get prescriptive, y'all. Billy, see you next week, man.
See you next week.